And I would like to welcome our new city clerk, Sue Spears, officially, even though she was sworn in at our last council meeting. But I will ask Madam City Clerk if you can please call roll call.
Thank you. Mayor Arzamonde?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Del Mar?
Here.
Councilmember Kaposha?
Here.
Councilmember Goss?
Here.
Councilmember Harabedian?
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Great job. Okay, and I'm going to ask our Mayor Pro Tem if she would like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and our invocation or inspiration.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As many of you know, one of our sistering cities lost an officer over the weekend. We did provide some of our officers for support for the city of Pomona. And I would just like to take a moment of silence to recognize probationary officer Gregory Callis, who was shot on Saturday. He leaves behind a wife and 2 small children. We could just take a moment of silence to recognize not only this officer, but all of our officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Before we approve the agenda, I'm going to ask if our Madam City Attorney can please report out on closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. The council met in closed session with the city attorney to receive a briefing on a matter of potential litigation. No action was taken, but direction was provided to the city attorney. And that's the end of my report, Mayor.
Great, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is to approve the agenda.
I'll move for approval.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. Next item is approval of the meeting minutes from February 27.
I have no changes.
Have a motion?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion also carries unanimously. Ooh, feedback. The next item on the agenda is for mayor and city council reports. Does anyone have anything to report out?
I'll go first.
Please.
My wife and members of my family attended the Wild and Scenic Film Festival
Okay.
at the Playhouse, and it was packed house, full, sold out. Really a lot of fun. A lot of people, just saw a lot of faces in town there. And I didn't realize it, but apparently this is the first time in 40 years that an actual film had been shown at the Playhouse. And also very impressive that Carolyn Dasher, who is on our ENER committee, actually paid for the screen in there. So, I mean, it's just incredible that we have this kind of dedication in town, and just weekly there's always something that just reminds me how much I love living in Sierra Madre because of the people here more than anything. But it was really fantastic. So I understand that they're going to be showing films from time to time there at the Playhouse now. So for some of you that predate me in the town, I'm still just a novice, only been here 35 years. But there are people in town who do remember seeing films there and can name the films that they did see long ago. So pretty cool.
Great, thank you.
I have nothing to report. I do have a very brief report. In my capacity as liaison to the Chamber of Commerce, my wife told me she picked out a tie for me today in anticipation of Wisteria Festival. And I came in here wanting to be excited about it. Unfortunately, we got some bad news from the Chamber of Commerce today. They have canceled the Saturday activities, the St. Patrick's activities in the park, because of the rain that's predicted. Otherwise, the Sunday activities will go on as scheduled, and we're hoping they'll catch a break with the weather and have another great festival.
I just would like to encourage everybody to go out to the Wisteria Festival on Sunday, then, just the Sunday.
Exactly.
It's not supposed to rain, the weather's supposed to be nice, and to get out there and support our city chamber. And that's all I have.
I just have one item to report on. LA City Mayor Eric Garcetti has been convening the 88 mayors of all the LA County together at least once or twice a year, and I attended this past week. The one issue, among other issues that were discussed, and what he tries to do is highlight issues that impact the region. But as we know, the Census 2020 is coming up, and as much as it's still 2 years away, there's a lot of planning that goes into that process, but also emphasizing how important it is. And it's interesting because they have hard to survey blocks throughout the county. Sierra Madre, as you can imagine, is not hard to survey, which is good. But the numbers are extremely important when it comes to money and when it comes to power. So it's that much more important that we have accurate numbers as we're looking to 2020, especially given the environment at this point where a lot of folks don't want to come out and talk and share their information. But I wanted to share that with you because this is going to be, again, about the entire region, not just about Sierra Madre. I think our numbers are pretty accurate here, but it really is about our county, it's about our state, and ensuring that we have the proper count so that as we are looking at funding and allocation at all levels of government, that it is equitable and fair. Okay, so moving on, the next item is public comment. So if anyone here would like to comment on any item that is not on the agenda, please come forward, and if you can please state your name. And you have 3 minutes. Hello, neighbor.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. I am here on request from the Preserve Sierra Madre group. Matt Bryant asked for me to speak. He is not able to be here this evening, but the comment was on how fine a job that the council has been doing. And I think you know I spoke before. I've been very pleased with how the council has been handling all the problems in the community and having balanced the book, so to speak. So everyone is supportive of all the members running for council, so it's a real pleasure to see that all 3 of you are running. And then in regards to us all working together, I got this beautiful literature in the mail, and then I look down here, and it's got my wife's name in here, but there's an Alan Hong living at my house. I get a little concerned.
That could be a problem.
So just to mention that I know we spend a lot of money on these brochures, so one should make sure that they have their lists right. So thank you, council, and thank you for you 3 running again, and you have the support of the community. Thank you.
Sir, for the record, I apologize. Can you give me your name?
I'm sorry.
Gary Hood.
Gary Hood,
Thank you.
465 North Baldwin.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I just figured when I said neighbor that everyone would know. Okay, would anyone else like to comment on any item not on the agenda? And I notice our clock is gone. Our clock is
Broken.
missing. Okay. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our presentation. It's gone. So I would like to ask if Miss Sylvia Ramos will join me up at the podium. I have a certificate for her and for Red Cross Month. So this is a proclamation in recognition of Red Cross Month. And our certificate states as such. Whereas in 1973, the President of the United States proclaimed March as Red Cross Month and called on Americans to make a donation, volunteer, take a class, or give blood. And whereas the American Red Cross responds to disasters around the world, big or small, providing shelter, food, emotional support, and other necessities to those affected. The Red Cross collects nearly 40% of the nation's blood supply, provides 24-hour support to military members, veterans, and their families, teaches millions life-saving skills such as lifeguarding and CPR, and through its Restoring Family Links program connects family members separated by crisis, conflict, or migration. And whereas in 2017, the Los Angeles Region Red Cross supported and responded to 4 of the year's largest and most complex disasters: Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and the deadliest week of wildfires in California history, deploying over 300 trained disaster volunteers and nearly 500 employees, sending over 8,000 shelter support materials and equipment. And now therefore be it resolved, in recognition of the importance of volunteering, making a donation, taking a class, or giving blood, the City Council of City of Sierra Madre does hereby proclaim the month of March to be American Red Cross Month, and urges all residents to show their support to the American Red Cross Los Angeles region. Presented this 13th day of March 2018, Mayor Rachel Arizmendi, Mayor Pro Tem Denise Del Mar, Council members John Capocha, Jean Goss, and John Harabedian. Thank you.
May I say a few words?
Madam Mayor and Council, I'd like to thank you very much for supporting the Red Cross. It is my honor to represent the Red Cross on behalf of Sierra Madre. Thank you for this proclamation.
Thank you.
Would it be possible to take a photo for the Red Cross?
Of course. You would like the entire council? Would be
Please.
nice? Okay.
Thank you.
Those were some very staggering numbers, so thank you, Red Cross, and we look forward to supporting and recognizing Red Cross not just through this month, but throughout the year. Next on our agenda is the consent calendars, and I'll ask Mr. City Manager if he can address those, please.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 4 items on consent this evening. Item 1A, adoption of Resolution 18-09 of the City Council of the City of Sierra Madre approving certain demands. Item B, annual housing element progress report on status of regional housing needs allocation. Item C, consideration of professional services agreement with Martin and Chapman. Item D, National League of Cities Service Line Warranty Program.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions on any of the items on consent calendar from council?
I do just on 1D.
Please.
I guess my question was, I think I had personally received letters from this organization a few times in the past, and I was just wondering, by entering into this agreement, is it going to be anything different than what the residents will be receiving? Is it? I guess I'm just wondering what the joint marketing effort really is going to be like versus what it has been in the past, where I think they just send out a letter, and if you want it, you sign up.
Yeah, I think without knowing exactly what you received, I believe the difference would be this one is co-branding, and we're providing it. It's being provided to the residents as being endorsed by the city.
Okay. And do we think, for the cities that have already endorsed it, I guess, is there a benefit to the city for doing that? Is this a provider of this service that we think is above and beyond the other providers? I don't even know if there's other providers of this. I assume that there are, but.
So I can answer the first one, the benefit to the city, and I'll let Director Reynoso, and I believe I have a representative from the company here as well, try and answer the second part. On the benefit side, there's 2 options where the city can receive a royalty for co-sponsoring the, we call it the inflow and infiltration, but for the warranty, we chose not to receive a royalty so we could reduce the cost to residents if they chose to accept it. As far as the other companies, we'll see if Director Reynoso or a representative from the company can answer that.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Residents can contact their homeowner's insurance policy to see if they offer a rider for that type of coverage. I'm not aware of any other companies that will do a marketing program partnership with the city to reach out to our residents. Bill Coffey is here, is a representative, and maybe he can further answer that question.
Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. My name is Bill Coffey from the National League of Cities Service Line Warranty Program. And this is the only program offered by the National League of Cities. It's a program that we've been working with them since 2010, and it is unique in that way. There aren't really any other companies that have a nationwide program like ours. So it's unique. There might be some local, but even in that respect, different coverages, perhaps very high deductibles, many, many differences.
I do have a question. What deductible is there? It doesn't mention in the staff report.
There is no deductible. This is just a low monthly fee, under $10 a month for the water line program, under $10 a month for the sewer line program. These are the lateral lines that are on the homeowner's property, buried underground in the front yard. And they can get in or out of the program anytime they want, voluntary to sign up by responding to the mailer, and they can call us to cancel at any time.
Yeah.
I have another question. These are as good a rates as are available? The
Correct.
homeowner couldn't do any better on their own?
The rates are based on the state of California, so you take advantage of the volume of business we do here in California and nationwide through the National League of Cities.
So, Mr. Coffey, I guess my question is, you know, why should we support you? I mean, why should the city give you our logo, and why should we co-brand this if we're not, if you're going to do this anyway? I assume you're going to reach out to these folks anyway, and the city isn't getting a royalty, so I guess I'm just confused as to why we should necessarily do this.
Sure. Actually, we would not reach out to your residents without the city's approval.
Okay, so I'm mistaken. So whoever reached out to me, it was a different service provider maybe or something? Okay.
And again, there's a lot of those out there, and this eliminates that hassle for all of council members, city manager, England, et cetera, because the program, the city's vetted it, they're familiar with it, and with the city's logo on there, by participating in the program and allowing the use of the logo, we then can offer the program to your residents. If the city doesn't want to offer that use of the logo, then the program's not offered.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that clarifies it.
And again, fully optional. And the city approves the letter. It's 3 direct mail pieces per year. So the city would approve the letter before it goes out. So again, no surprises. It's done on a very professional scale.
And you guys pay for the letter, not us. You just use our...
There is no cost to the city whatsoever, nothing aside from a few minutes to review the letter. We take care of the cost of the postage, the claims, the local area licensed plumber, contracting them, and all customer service functions.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for the city manager. Once we enter into this, will there be a press release or something on the city website to say that we're doing this? I mean, I see this as really could be a tremendous benefit to our residences because it gives them an option, you know. And especially in our case, I think if it's statewide averages, I think you're getting a pretty good deal here in Sierra Madre. But so how are we going to do anything to just announce it ourselves?
We discuss social media in our e-blast, so all of our email subscribers as well. We'd be happy to do a press release, or even look at putting it in the utility mailers before they went out. Would probably be actually, as we're speaking out loud, that's probably the most effective way to get the word out.
Okay, I'd also like to see that you mentioned that we are waiving the revenue for the city as well, you know, so to keep the cost as low as possible to our customers.
And I would concur, we really do need to send something out so that the residents do know that this is in fact coming from the city.
Yeah.
We'd be happy to do that.
In that 75 cents.
Yeah.
Had another source of revenue, and nobody would have known the difference, but our city manager didn't think that was appropriate, so kudos.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Coffey? Okay, seeing none. Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, council.
Do we have any other questions on any other item on the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, we'll open this up for public comment. If anyone in the public would like to comment on the consent calendar items, please come to the podium, state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, John Hutt. Mayor and council members, just wanted to give you a little extra information on the housing element and try to demystify some of the RENA stuff. As you know, Governor Brown recently signed SB 35 and a bunch of other housing bills, which seem very ominous and could have potentially large consequences on cities. The Planning Commission had a meeting about this to understand it. we found out at that point that the city had never supplied a required annual housing update, and we also found out that this was a very common practice of cities. Maybe that's why they did SB 35. But that aside, so we are 4 years into our 8-year housing cycle. After we had the meeting, staff quickly got onto this, and this isn't an annual housing 1 year, it's actually 4 years. So they've caught us up to date. Director Gonzalez and his staff have done a great job.
Great.
And it really is not horrible news. The great fear of RENA is that we're really far behind and we're going to get all these penalties. We've actually far exceeded our market rate numbers. That's in large part to Kensington. Even though we're halfway through the cycle, we've already produced 357% of the units that we're supposed to. We're not as far along on affordable. We're only 37.5%, where we should be at 50, but that's still probably better than most cities. What that means really in consequences for us is that under SB 35, certain multifamily projects can be done without review on the city side, without any discretionary review to make sure that the design is good, if we are not at our numbers. But because we are at our numbers for market rate, we'll still have the power to review those. The ones we won't are affordable ones, but as you know from the YAC and the senior project, those don't usually happen unless the city subsidizes them, and then obviously the city would have some control there. So overall, it's a great job by staff, and it's pretty good news on where we are for our RENA numbers. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Hutt, for that background on that item. Anybody else want to comment on any item on the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for discussion.
I would like to just comment on the item D, just to follow up the discussion. We just had a water subcommittee meeting recently where we hashed this out in detail, and I feel like this is a really great program for people in town, particularly who have 30, 40, 50-year-old plumbing systems, gas lines, whatever. This would be an opportunity. I'm not going to sell it to anybody, but certainly gives them an opportunity to protect themselves against a catastrophic failure in one of those systems. So,
thank you.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
aye.
Okay, aye, and that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is for public hearing, and I believe we have Director Gonzalez coming to the front.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, we do have a PowerPoint presentation for you this evening. So the City Council will be considering amending the Nonconforming Uses Ordinance, which is codified under Chapter 17.56 of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code. As part of the 2015 General Plan Update, the ordinance is to be amended pursuant to the following implementation measure, which is Implementation Measure 44, that the city shall amend the Nonconforming Uses Ordinance as necessary to allow reconstruction of existing nonconforming structures that must be replaced due to deterioration or hazards such as fire and earthquakes. The ordinance regulates land uses and structures that were conforming at the time of their construction and or establishment, but have since become non-conforming due to amendments to the city zoning code. The current ordinance is deemed to be inadequate in addressing a variety of non-conforming issues that staff comes across fairly commonly. And the ordinance has also not been updated for many years and continues to be difficult to apply. So the objective of the amendment is to seek to preserve long-term continuance of nonconformities that conflict with current zoning and building requirements through regulation of modifications and additions. The Planning Commission formed a 3-member subcommittee that included Chair Spears, Commissioners Hutt and Fryerman Hunt. The committee met on numerous occasions, and they were tasked with providing recommendations for a complete overhaul of the Nonconforming Uses Ordinance. The subcommittee also recommended amendments to the adaptive reuse of the city's historic preservation code. John Hutt, Commissioner Hutt, is here this evening and would also like to make a statement after conclusion of my staff report. So the structure of the nonconforming uses ordinance is broken out, actually separates both nonconforming uses and nonconforming structures throughout the body of the ordinance. But to summarize, I'm providing the following. So the nonconforming use is essentially to be maintained and continued, provided no increase or enlargement of floor area, space, or volume. So a nonconforming use is more specific to a use, such as a business. We can look at the Montecito district, the manufacturing district, and if we said there was nonconforming uses are determined to be single-family homes there, this is a manufacturing district, that use would allow it to continue, as well as the structure, as long as general maintenance is maintained on those properties, but no significant increase. So uses and structures vary a little bit different. I'll go through those as we go through the presentation. So a nonconforming use which is replaced by a nonconforming use shall not again be used or occupied by a nonconforming use, specific to change of use. So you cannot have one existing nonconforming use and replace it with another use that's also nonconforming. And that goes with the replacement of nonconforming use prohibited, going from changing one use to another nonconforming use. Termination of nonconforming use by discontinuance. So many cities, the time period for no longer continuing or occupying a particular use is anywhere from 6 months to a year. The commission did look at this very carefully and determined that a nonconforming use will only lose its nonconforming status if that use is discontinued for a continuous period of 24 months. Nonconforming use within a structure shall also lose its nonconforming status if the structure is demolished or removed. Regarding ordinary repair and maintenance, as I mentioned, ordinary repair and maintenance of a nonconforming structure is allowed, and reconstruction after involuntary damage, such as an earthquake, fire, or other catastrophic event, will also allow the property to be reconstructed, of course, coming up to current building codes, but utilizing the development standards that were present at the time of construction. And this also includes other damage such as termite infestation, dry rot, or mold. For non-residential uses and structures, whenever a nonconforming non-residential structure or a structure occupied by non-conforming use is involuntary damage, again, the structure may be repaired, reconstructed, or replaced with a new structure, and its use resumed if a building permit for the reconstruction is issued within a 24-month period. Residential uses and structures, very similar. Again, nonconforming single and multifamily dwellings that have been involuntarily damaged may be repaired, reconstructed, or replaced with a new structure using the same development standards applied to the damaged or destroyed structure, provided no expansion of the gross floor area occurs and a building permit is issued within 24 months. So again, you can reconstruct both building types and uses within 24 months of obtaining a building permit to the same development standards that were present at the time of construction. Alterations and or additions to nonconforming uses and structures. In this case, elimination of nonconformity. So in order to render the use or structure in conformity with current development standards, that is permitted. Reduction of a nonconformity, work which reduces the nonconformity of residential setbacks shall also be allowed, provided that the modified setback is at least 10 feet in the front yard, 5 feet in the rear yard, and 3 feet in the side yard. I have a slight example of what this might look like for those two prior bullet points as well as these two. So if we have an existing building, which is shown here in the site plan to the right of the bullet points, with showing a detached garage at the rear, the crosshatch pattern is an area of addition. In this case, the building is only placed 3 feet from the property line. It's existing non-conforming, a 5-foot side yard, is required. In this case, the nonconformity could be extended, maintaining the 3-foot side yard, but you would need to get a variance in this case. And so the nonconforming structure should not be altered or enlarged as to further increase the difference between existing conditions and the current development standards unless the variance is obtained. And also alteration and enlargement may occur, but only in compliance with the current development standards. The second part of the amendments to this evening is the Historic Preservation Ordinance amendments. And it's basically to achieve conformity with some of the changes that we had already made to the R3 standards. And we wanted to make sure that we made some additional changes here so everything is working in unison. So one of the things that was done to the Historic Preservation Ordinance is that we did revise the definition of bed and breakfast inn. We also allow for the adaptive reuse of historic structures to include multifamily historic properties up to 12 units as bed and breakfast inns. And also we imposed a requirement for an innkeeper of this type of use to be present on the site. This amendment makes the ordinance consistent with the recent amendments to the R3 zoning ordinance. We also revised the title of section 17.82.065 to adaptive reuse of historic landmarks. And additional amendments included expansion of potential adaptive reuses. Currently, they're only allowed in single-family zones, but we would like to also allow them in commercial uses such as small entrepreneurial businesses, service and professional offices as adaptive reuse of historic residential structures. And that would be under the approval of a conditional use permit. The City Council has the following alternatives before them. You can either adopt Ordinance 1396, recommending approval of Municipal Code Text Amendment 1707, pursuant to Planning Commission Resolution 17-10. You can adopt the Ordinance 1396, recommending approval with modifications. You can recommend denial, stating the reasons for denial. And the City Council can also continue the matter and provide direction to staff. That concludes my portion of, well, staff recommendation again is to waive the reading in full and authorize reading by title only by ordinance number 1396, Municipal Code Text Amendment 17-07, amending Title 17, Chapter 17.56, Nonconforming Uses Ordinance, and Chapter 17.82, Historic Preservation Ordinance, pursuant to Planning Commission Resolution 17-10. That concludes my portion of the presentation, and I believe Commissioner Hutt also wanted to provide make some comments as well.
And before Commissioner Hutt comes to the podium, I want to ask council if they have any questions from Director Gonzalez, and thank you for that presentation. Do you have any questions at this time for Director Gonzalez?
I do, but maybe Commissioner Hutt might address them, so maybe I'll wait in here. But
okay. Commissioner Hutt? Thank you, Director Gonzalez.
Mayor and council members, well, I think Director Gonzalez gave you all the details, and I also sent you an email that had more in it, so I won't go over all that. Just the high points. As staff and legal counsel can attest, our current non-conforming ordinance is horrible. It's so ambiguous, it's almost not understandable. And staff spends a lot of time trying to figure it out. So one of the big changes here is that we threw it out and started over from scratch. We have an ordinance that works, that's functional, that's a lot clearer. It's going to provide a lot better direction to property owners, and it's going to save a lot of time for staff and legal counsel. Unlike our old code, we're not seeking to, and other cities sometimes do this, to phase out any uses. We have a few non-conforming uses in town, but nothing that we think is really problematic. The quintessential example of this is a pig farm. If people move out and it becomes residential and they want to phase that out. In Pasadena, the big issue they have is as a over-concentration of liquor stores in certain areas. We don't have anything like that. We have Mary's Market in the Canyon, which everybody likes. We have a few institutional uses in the commercial zone, which everyone's okay with. They just don't want to expand. And we also have some residential uses in commercial areas that are non-conforming. And we're probably going to deal with that more when we update the commercial code. We also separate out, unlike our old code, the issue of non-conforming use versus non-conforming structure, because it's a really big difference to have the house next to you have a side yard that's a little bit small versus living next to a pig farm. So you really want to treat those differently instead of sort of one size fits all. The modifications also greatly allow for and provide for reuse and facilitate reuse of structures, especially in the downtown. And as we were on that subject, that's how we got to the historic code and fixing the reuse issue there where there was an inconsistency. And next we're moving to the commercial code, which we have a meeting on Thursday night if y'all would like to come, where we're going to deal with more reuse issues and other related issues. So that's really the high points. I'm happy to field any questions if you have, or if you want examples of how it works.
I do have a question. So can you please explain to people who may not be familiar with the word non-conforming what we're actually talking about when we're talking about a non-conforming unit or a non-conforming structure?
Well, yeah, the non-conformance is really come in two varieties. One is a use and one is a structure. So a use is, if you have a residential area, Mary's Market is not allowed. That use, a commercial use is not allowed there. That's a non-conforming use. A non-conforming structure is one that doesn't match what our zoning requirements are now. So the basic setback in residential is 5 feet on the side yard and a little bit bigger if you have more. So if you have a house that's right on the property line or 3 feet, that's a non-conforming structure. And generally the way we treat the structure issue is that if you have a non-conformity, you can still make changes to the rest of the house, the part that's not non-conforming, as long as that complies to code. But you can't change the non-conformity to make it more non-conforming without a variance. If you make it less non-conforming, then you can do that sometimes under limited discretionary review.
And if I'm understanding this correctly, what this is actually doing is spelling it out. So if something does happen to a residence, a disaster, it's easier for our planning commission to say, yes, that was non-conforming at the time. This is how you can build it back.
Well, there's sort of two issues. One is if you have a casualty and the thing burns down, the general rule there is you get to build back whatever you had. A lot of this goes into more detail of if you have a non-conforming structure, what modifications can you make?
Okay.
So as I said before, we allow you to modify the not non-conforming part, or in other words, the conforming part. A lot clearer way to say that.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a few questions. Okay, just a non-conforming structure may be maintained and continued, provided that there is no physical change. Is that going to be a problem like you brought up the example of Montecito District, if there's a house there, and some of the houses might not be in the greatest condition. I'll just throw out a hypothetical example, like if the windows in an old craftsman home had been replaced with the louvered windows.
Right.
Would you allow those to be changed and upgraded with?
Well, the way that is phrased, it says you can't make any changes to a nonconformance except as allowed in this chapter. And then, so you got to look later on in the chapter where we allow for routine maintenance and repair.
Yeah, so you could make some upgrades like remodeling a kitchen and things like that. Okay, just another one. A nonconforming use within a structure shall lose its nonconforming status if the structure is demolished or removed. But what if the building is termite infested and moldy, and it turns out that it's cheaper to demolish the building and rebuild it? Would you allow the non-conforming use?
Well, the issue there becomes whether you're in a voluntary demolition or involuntary demolition.
Yes.
And so we actually expanded the definition of involuntary demolition to include not just one-time casualties, but also decay over time. Mm-hmm. And so if the decay gets to the point where it's non-repairable, mm-hmm. and then the director determines it to be non-habitable, then at that point it's considered an involuntary casualty, and they can rebuild.
Okay, so that's a case where it's not habitable or occupiable, but what if it's so bad and it's just going to cost more to try to repair it than to demolish it and rebuild it? 'Cause that's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, at that point, you get to the line of what's the difference between full demolition and repair, and that's something I think staff would have to address. I'm not really sure about that. Because, I mean, the idea is that if you tear it down on purpose, then you're done, right?
Yeah.
And so if really what you're saying is this is just an elaborate type of repair, then that's something that, you know, if you can get staff to agree to that, then I think that'd be okay.
You would need to work with staff, okay. So then you brought up the example of Mary's Market, the continuous period of 24 months. So if Mary's Market, you know, as it's changed hands a few times, my fear is that it's not economical and it might shut down for a while, and 24 months would go by, then there would be no more Mary's Market, right?
There would be no Mary's Market, that's right. And that's one of the reasons why we lengthened it to 2 years. A lot of cities are 1 year or less, or some I've seen 18 months. But, you know, we found places, especially like in downtown, where there's a restaurant that turns over.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you've got it fully built out as a restaurant with all this really expensive equipment. And if you have a market downturn, that could sit for 6 months. And that would be horrible then if you have to tear out all that, you know, restaurant equipment. So that's why we extended it to 2 months, 2 years. One of the issues particular with Mary's Market is the general plan for the canyon speaks about especially allowing certain commercial uses, and that concept is not really addressed in the canyon zone. So if we wanted to allow Mary's Market to not be a non-conforming use, we could deal with the zoning there. And it's also one of the reasons why we got into the historic issue, because the house or the building next to Mary's Market is a historic building, and that in the past was an office. But it's been more than 2 years since it's functioned as an office. So that way, that will allow that to go back into office if people want to. And potentially the old fire station in the canyon could transition as well.
Okay, good. Sounds like it's well thought
Very
out.
well thought out.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Hutt. Yeah, generally, I mean, I think this is great, and I think it makes sense. I have questions just how, you know, maybe where the rubber meets the road on a few things, and one of them is how we are defining structural alteration. So, you know, I could think of a lot of hypotheticals that maybe it would be a structural alteration, or maybe it wouldn't, and kind of goes to Councilmember Capocha's point. For example, if I have a non-conforming structure and it doesn't have central AC, but I want to put central AC in, does that count as a structural alteration, or is that just a repair and modification?
Well, I think that in any event, that wouldn't, unless for some reason the reason it was not conforming was because of height and you wanted to put the HVAC on top. I mean, if you're doing internal changes, you're not increasing the nonconformance, so you'd be able to do that whether it's structural or not structural. So.
Okay, so that helps. So structural alteration really means you're making a change to the structure that could be seen from the outside in terms of the footprint of the structure. Is that a...
Well, that would be one of the reasons why you'd need that exception, and usually that comes into a seismic, and if you'll see one of the exceptions there is for seismic.
Right.
So, you know, if you're, you know, a lot of the older buildings were built without proper foundations and whatnot, and those you could upgrade those.
I guess my concern is not that the current planning commission gets it, current staff gets it. My concern is 20 years down the road when someone's like, well, what's a structural alteration? I mean, you know, I'm changing the door, and our new planning director or new director of preservation and development says, yeah, well, maybe structural alteration is changing a door. Is there any way to make it clear in here just to say structural alteration is X? You know, we just don't define it. And it's all well and good when everyone at present time understands it, but I think it could get, you know, less clear down the road. So that's something to think about. We don't have to necessarily answer that now. And then my other question is along those lines, which is how are we defining enlargement of a use, right? Because enlargement of a structure, I get it. I mean, but let's say we have a restaurant. You brought that up. What would enlargement of a use mean? Would it mean that you're serving food, you know, in a in more of the space, or let's say it's a church, you're using more of the space for more church-like things? I mean, what is an enlargement of a use, I guess?
Enlargement of a use really means adding square footage.
Okay, so it's really enlargement of the structure.
Yeah,
right?
that's how you enlarge the use, because there's more
Got
square
it.
footage to do the use.
So there's really no, and that's helpful, because to me, I was trying to think of a scenario where you're enlarging the use but not enlarging the structure. Is there ever going to be a situation where you enlarge the use and not?
There
And
could
we have
be.
another commissioner who's.
Commissioner.
There actually
Commissioner
could be.
Yeah, this is my concern, I guess. but-
Gina Friarman. It would be if you have a non-conforming use, let's say it occupies a structure that's 5,000 square feet, and it's using 2,500 square feet of that structure, and it wants to increase into the other half of the building. That would be increasing the use, but it would not be changing the structure.
Right. So that's kind of what so is there any way that we can, that's helpful. It's helpful explanation. Is there any way to work?
It's a use, it doesn't affect the structure.
Right, right.
It doesn't affect the nonconformity of the structure, which could also exist, but is not part of increasing the use.
Sure.
But it does increase the square footage of the amount of use.
I think what you were saying is right. I interpret it
It
wrong.
doesn't,
So.
but what we don't get to is intensity of use. And we had a lot of discussion about that, whether you know, let's say you have a restaurant that's not very popular, and then it's replaced by a very popular restaurant, and it could have a lot more patrons go. Too bad. That's not for purposes of the ordinance. Increasing the use.
Yeah, and this is just something we can consider. I mean, I think having definitions for alteration of a structure and enlargement of use would be helpful, maybe. I mean, I don't really want to get into the business of wordsmithing this, but that to me is something that popped out. The other, I think my only other question was, there's a procedure in here that they can appeal to staff to make the determination if the building no longer basically it's a non-conforming use, and if there is a structural alteration, then there's going to be some sort of determination and then they can appeal it to the director. What if the director makes the determination that they still aren't happy with? Are they allowed to appeal then to you, the planning commission, or to us?
Generally, there's an appeal.
And that's the general appeal,
Yeah.
and it doesn't state in here, but it's just, they would just go to that general provision? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the two big things are just, how are we defining structural alteration and then enlargement of use? I guess those are my two. General, I think overall it looks good. I think there's logic to it compared to the old statute. I think it's a lot clearer. I wonder if we can clear up those two things, but that's all.
Any other questions for Commissioner Hutt, Director Gonzalez, or Commissioner Farhunt? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Oh, please.
I'd like to start off by saying that we really need to thank John Hutt, because strangely, he loves working on these code changes.
Yeah.
You could tell.
And there aren't that many people who love doing it, and I think in the overall scheme of things, doing this is way more important than the individual projects that we do, because this is going to affect what happens in the city for years to come. And to have someone who's really great at the minutia of this, and then to have the commission work on it I think it's super important. And I think that in this particular case, the non-conforming ordinance was just ridiculous. And I think that we spent a lot of time thinking about how it would affect changes in the city that we want and that we don't want. I think it's a really a great improvement over certainly what we have.
Yeah,
I think we should give Commissioner Hutt a round of applause.
Yes. Well, and if you can all please extend the thanks to the entire commission. I know there was a lot of work put behind this, and also to the staff, so thank you. So we'll go ahead and open this up this is a public hearing, so if anyone would like to comment on this item, if you can please come to the podium and comment.
Yeah.
State your name. I think they covered it all, right? So, okay, thank you. I'll bring it back to council for discussion.
You know, well, of course, thank you to the commission and to Commissioner Hutt. This was something that way back when we were working on the general plan that came up because it's kind of ugly. It's hard to understand and trying to make it simple. And also we wanted to be able to kind of help the businesses in the community. So thank you both for doing that for us. I know it took a lot of work, and it is hard to go through and try to forecast what your decision could be and how what the impact is going to be. And thank you for being so thoughtful for that.
I'll just add my 10 cents worth. Seems to me, based on what I understand, that this takes up a lot of staff time, and that because of the weakness of our current ordinance, and it seems like this is reasonable and probably will make life a little easier for our staff and maybe even for our residents. Clarity is always important in everything, and I think this is a good step forward.
Maybe I should have asked this question, but procedurally, given Councilmember Harabedian's thoughts on it, is there a way to go through tonight's process with adding the definition pieces to it?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
I mean, sure, you can provide direction to staff to come back with some clarifying definitions and still stay on target to do first reading tonight, and then look at the definitions, because they're intended to add clarity, not new code. But I will say that generally in a non-conforming use ordinance, they're really normally drafted very broadly. Now, that does not mean that we couldn't have a specific definition of, for example, expansion of a non-conforming use means expanding the use within an existing structure, increasing the square footage within an existing structure. If you want to limit it to that, we could certainly do that. We can either try to do it tonight, or you can provide direction to staff of the kind of change you want to see, the clarification. We could bring it back to you at the next meeting.
You know, you made the point that I was about to make, which is there's some beauty in not having the definitions in there, right? To make it broad, and so I guess to the extent that I'm confused, that really doesn't matter. I mean, if this is clear to staff, again, I'm going to assume that 20 years from now it's going to be clear to staff then too. So, Vincent, Gabe, does it seem clear enough to you guys? Because if it is, then again, just because I think there may be some ambiguity doesn't really matter. So
I can say for myself, I know how I would interpret it as it's written today. That doesn't necessarily mean that it would always be interpreted that way. Having said that, adding definitions to specific sections you can't eliminate all ambiguity.
Right. Yeah.
I think the ordinance as drafted, and Vincent and I talked about actually the 2 points you brought up a lot. So we know how we would interpret them. We're a fan of allowing interpretation when possible, as opposed to prescribing it when we can avoid it.
Yeah, and I think you guys are reasonable, and that's fine. My fear, I guess, would be you get the unreasonable planning director, and they're just not going to let anyone do anything, and they're going to overinterpret. But I think that to the extent you're going to try to define these things, it's tough too, because it's. I don't think it's crystal clear.
Well, the other thing is, after a while, you have some precedent in the way that it's been interpreted, and that would be taken into account if there's a question about how broadly or how narrowly expansion of use or even an expansion of structure, but it's really the expansion of use, I think, would be interpreted. And there's still a provision in the municipal code that allows the director to create an administrative interpretation in writing that then sits on the books and is controlling going forward. So we still have that, and that could still happen. And the last thing that I will say is that this was drafted to make it easier, not harder, on our residents, and to keep the character of the community that you have today. It was not drafted in a way to try to, which some nonconforming use ordinances are, to try to eliminate those nonconforming uses. That was not the point. So by having that very broadly stated, like I say, we could come back and create a definition which is exactly as Commissioner Hutt testified, or if you think it's a problem later, the director could also create a written interpretation which stays on the books.
Yeah, no, I'm good with it the way it is. The more we talk about it, and all that was helpful. And I just want to thank the planning commissioners and staff, and especially Commissioner Hutt, who did sit down with me and kind of walk me through this so I could understand it better. So well done.
Any other comments from council members? Okay, seeing none, we do need a motion on this item.
I'll move to approve it.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Great, thank you. And again, thank you to the commission and staff on this item. Next item on the agenda is our discussion items. We have 3 today, and it looks like Management Analyst Carlson will be presenting on the first item for MSRC.
Yes, good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. Item number 3 before you this evening is the consideration of Resolution 1810, which would effectuate the reception of $50,000 in Mobile Source Air Pollution Reduction Review Committee, also known as MSRC, Clean Transportation Funds. And tonight, staff is recommending that the council accept the Clean Transportation Funding Grant, again in the amount of $50,000, and adopt Resolution 1810, also allocating these grant funds towards the operations and maintenance efforts of a San Gabriel Valley-wide Metro Bike Share program that is currently being coordinated through the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments. The city of Sierra Madre has been working for approximately 9 months with the Transportation Subcommittee of the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments in their efforts to expand the Metro Bike Share program into the San Gabriel Valley. It recently had expanded into Pasadena. There's been quite a bit of interest in our community. This effort was recently bolstered by the award of $4.5 million to the COG from the California Transportation Commission. The project, as it's currently envisioned, would provide 840 bicycles and 84 bike stations throughout the San Gabriel Valley. And Sierra Madre is a very enthusiastic partner with 14 other cities in crafting and planning this project. There is a requirement that the City Council receive a very brief presentation. It's 7 slides. It's from the MSRC. It would be required simply to receive the funds no matter what we decide to do with them. And I was anticipating some assistance from Christian Cruz, who is a remarkable analyst with the Transportation Committee of the San Gabriel Valley COG. And unfortunately, he is unavailable at the last minute. So if it's the pleasure of the council, I would like to go ahead and provide this presentation to you, just so we wouldn't have to bring it back at a later date. Okay.
Fine, thank you.
Again, this is from the MSRC. It's a little bit different than AQMD, but it's a big supporter of the AQMD and a wide variety of air quality and projects in the community. MSRC was established by the California legislature in 1990, and again, their mission is to invest funds to reduce air pollution generated by mobile sources. So we're not talking about standalone generators, which is also a consideration many times. Cars, trucks, buses, vehicles, and such like that. The funds are generated by a surcharge on motor vehicle registration. The MSRC works very closely with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, but they want to really point out that they are not the regulatory agency. There is significant air quality challenges in our region. According to the South Coast AQMD, we are in extreme non-attainment for ozone. And ozone, they'd like to point out, causes the respiratory ailments and is a primary component of smog. Mandatory air pollution reductions are needed now. You can see there's a 45% reduction that we need by 2023. And to effectuate this change, the Air Quality Management District has come out with an air quality management plan, final in 2016. These funds are basically to jumpstart the efforts within that plan and to support the efforts within that plan. The $50,000 is reserved for the city of Sierra Madre because we participate in AB 2766 subvention funds. Primarily, we have used these funds in the past for our compressed natural gas vehicles and our CNG station. And that is the conclusion of the presentation. And in conclusion, staff is recommending that the City Council adopt Resolution 1810 and authorize the use of the city's MSRC funds towards this regional bike share effort. And I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Annalise Carlson. I'm glad you gave that presentation. That's how I imagine it to be. I'm curious as to Arcadia's stance on this. I see that they're not one of the cities that's participating in this moment, and considering their geographic location.
Well, that's a good question, and Arcadia is definitely one of the locations that the San Gabriel Valley in general looks at. Their proximity to the Gold Line, for example, and some of the activities they have around there. And my understanding is they just didn't sign their name on the dot when this thing was really getting going at the beginning. I believe that they're going to, come and start participating as soon as it develops a little bit more, and as soon as they realize how valuable that $4.5 million resource is to the region. I think they'll be interested.
So bike rider would just have to make sure they can get through Arcadia at this point.
Yes.
To dock their bike. Thank you. What other questions do we have for Annalise Carlson?
I have a question. How many bikes do we get?
That's a good question. We don't know, and to be fully transparent, I think Sierra Madre will be on the second half of the rollout. We are not the densest or the biggest need for bikes right now, but I do think it is a valid project. There was some consideration about going alone. There's a number of vendors, and I think some of the council members even got approached by Go Bike or other vendors like that. But if we were to do that, these bikes would not work with the Metro program. The Metro program has all the riders right now, has all the momentum, and has a lot of the enthusiasm behind it. So we really thought it would be better to wait and join the bigger project. So we also are considering, we would really like to have stationless bikes, and that's something that's going to roll out. The consideration of that in about a year. We'll get a lot more details on Metro's stationless bikes, which we think would work better in Sierra Madre. I would rather not put a big bulky station somewhere and then have to move it for one reason or another. So that's how it's developed.
How would that work? Just a little.
It's interesting.
Bike
Your
stands around
tap
the
card, and the lock. It uses a lock for the tap card, and there's certain requirements on where you can lock it. It has to be like a city bike rack. It cannot be a stop sign. It can't be inside an apartment complex or things like that. But a lot of those things are, just kind of developing right now with the technology.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, great work on this, but you just touched upon one of my questions, which was, can you just explain a little bit how it would work? So if I took my bike from Sierra Madre and rode to Arcadia, I could leave it in Arcadia,
Yes.
get on the Metro, and then just get
And
it.
part of the Metro program includes, the maintenance and operations. That's those guys that will go back and retrieve and try to get it evenly spread from time to time, and that's a big consideration, and that's kind of the test case, the prototypes in Santa Monica, downtown Los Angeles, and we're trying to see how that's all working out.
And are they, for the bigger cities, are they working with the employers and the companies to have the docking stations at the?
I would assume so. In my visits to downtown Los Angeles, I see them very strategically located on sustainability or green-oriented businesses or districts like in downtown LA. You will see them there. It would be something that we would have to approach our community. If we wanted a station, where would we want it? I believe the Chamber of Commerce might have some input on that. But if it's stationless, I think we can kind of see how it evolves. I picture people getting off the Gold Line, taking a bike up to our trails, and maybe back, and being able to use our mountains without any vehicular use at all that way.
See, I'm thinking that people are going to grab the bike in Sierra Madre, ride it down to the train station when they go. Then when they come back, they're going to take Uber to get us
Yep.
back here and leave the bike down there.
Anybody that learned to ride a bike in Sierra Madre can envision that.
Yeah,
as well.
so I'm wondering if they're going to have to do a pricing tier where it costs a lot more to ride the bike downhill than uphill. You know?
Okay, any other questions for at this point? Okay, seeing none, we will open this item up for public comment. If anyone would like to comment on this item, please come forward and state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
D. Alcorn on Grandview. That just raised a question. Would there be a charge then? Is this a charge that the rider has to, is he charged with it?
Yes, there's a nominal charge, monthly passes, single charge passes.
Actually, Management Analyst Carlson, if you can answer that, the mic, just to make sure those.
Well, no, I had another, that was my own. Okay. I just had well, I guess I did have another question, is that, now this is supposedly going to help with our it's a lot of money overall that's going into this. And I just wondered, has there been a pilot program, and how successful has it been in accomplishing what the goals are? You know, because it sounds good, but I've heard other people say, well, yeah, they see the thing, but it really hasn't been all it's cracked up to be for meeting the intent for spending $4 million for something that, I mean, anyway, has there been a viable pilot program to indicate this is really going to be worthwhile for the money to spend, okay? And it's not clear to me that the program has happened that way. The second point is, I'm just wondering, what happens after this grant is over? Is there going to be any ongoing cost that the city is going to have to take on as a result of that? They say there's other going to do the maintenance, but is that the end of it? I mean, as far as we've gone, we're through with everything at that point? No more? Is that, it's not clear to me if there's going to be any other existing, once what's in there, they got a hook, and we have to do something else to accommodate this.
So, Analyst Carlson, I'll ask if you can address the cost issues. But I will just say for myself, working downtown LA in terms of a pilot, they've been doing it there for quite a while. I actually have a friend of mine that really just depends on the bicycle use there. Whether you can say that's the same for here in Sierra Madre, I think that's yet to be seen, and we'd have to test it. Maybe in downtown LA, there's a lot more need for it, and people may use it. And I always think about the hills myself. I've been in large metropolitan cities where you're at the bottom of the hill and you see all of the bikes there, but at the top, you know, there's nothing there. So, but in terms of cost,
yeah, I'm sorry I don't have the exact figure in my head, but I'm believing it's about $1.25 for 30 minutes. It's in that ballpark. It can be used with a tap card, or a lot of people are using apps on their phones that they would be able to just, you know, click and unlock the bicycle. And as Dee mentioned, and Mayor Arizmendi, we are fortunate that there are some test cases in front of us. You know, Long Beach, downtown Los Angeles, Santa Monica. I understand Pasadena has had a couple hiccups, so that's something that we're going to follow very closely. And that's, you know, kind of how we're going to look at it. I see this allocation of our $50,000 MSRC funds as kind of buying into a bigger pot of gold. If they have $4.5 million for this program, I believe that contributing at this early stage towards operations and maintenance might come back to us with even more support in the future. Plus, they're going to do the required match. We don't have the $50,000, we believe, to really pursue something with needing a match like that.
So would it have to be revisited at a certain time? After the initial
as the
50,000
rollout gets more formal, I'm sure we'll be bringing a lot more information to council. I attend a lot of the bike share meetings and get the developments on, you know, the way things are going. If we're getting a delay, if we're finding an unknown problem, if City of Pasadena finds out that it's not working for them and they quit, we'll find that out too.
So just to be clear, this is not a Sierra Madre program. This is a metro program.
Right, San Gabriel
So
Valley
we don't
based
pay
metro.
for, right, maintenance is none of that is Sierra Madre.
Not
It's
a-
just a matter of whether we are participating in the Metro program.
We might have, we did have to indicate that we may consider providing public space for a station at some point.
Yeah, yeah, I understand
That's all I've
that.
been really asked to give up or contribute.
And also, just to be clear, I mean, the staff report shows two alternatives. One is the Metro Bike Share Program, the other is electric vehicle charging stations. There is no other way to spend this money?
Well, without a matching funds, without another $50,000 that we would have to find, one of the qualifying programs is traffic light synchronization. So we crossed that one off right away.
Right, right.
We don't need that.
There are what they call first and last mile improvements, which maybe we could look into something that would work. Most of the analysis pointed to electronic vehicle charging station because it had the biggest promise, although I'm not super optimistic about finding additional funds for that match.
So that is our issue then, is that program requires a dollar for dollar city match.
Yes.
And
Now-
we don't have the money for that, so this is a better.
That's why we're recommending going ahead with this regional bike share.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to council for discussion.
I would just like to say that I saw this program working in Northern California, where we had our headquarters. We're now in Southern California, but in Northern California, we saw this with the BART transportation and the train up there, and it was really useful. Our headquarters was probably about 2 miles from the metro station, and a lot of the younger people actually, I'm going to say it, they were mostly the younger people who don't even have cars because they're so used to having the bikes available to them and the buses and the trains, and they just utilized it, and I saw it all the time. The station at the work, we had, I think, 10 bikes were there at all times. And they used it. We, as the employer, also we paid towards it for public transportation. So they get up to $250 a month. We pay for that so they could use that for their passes. And that's a requirement of a lot of employers, having to offset that. So I can see that people working in the city, the younger people, would probably take advantage of this, especially if they got that paid for. Thank you for bringing it.
Anyone else want to comment on this item?
No, well done. Thank you for bringing. Thanks for all the hard work and for bringing this to us.
Do we have a motion on this item?
Okay, I'll move to approve that.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Okay, our next, and we are asked if we can take a 5-minute break. So it's 7:45. If we can just come back at 7:50, please. Please take their seats. We have 2 exciting discussion items left on our agenda. And so I will ask Assistant City Manager Medina if she can present the next item, number 4, on the mid-year budget review.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. It is an exciting item, our mid-year budget review, fiscal year 2017-2018, which is also our second quarterly financial report. The purpose of the mid-year review is to evaluate the city's financial condition, and it goes beyond your typical quarterly financial report, that we not only look at current year-to-date activity and compare it to budget, but we also look back at historical information, current data, and reanalyze and reproject our revenues and expenditures, how we expect to end the fiscal year. The main focus of our mid-year review is on the city's main operating fund, which is the general fund. And the originally adopted budget fiscal year 2017-2018, we budgeted or estimated revenues to be 10.9 million. And we are projecting to end the fiscal year with increased revenues. Some of them are lower than originally budgeted. Some of them are higher, but overall, we're looking at an increase of revenues in the general fund of up to 11.1 million. On the expenditure side, the original adopted budget projected 10.9 million in expenditures. Our revised budget is 11.1 million. The main revision to this was a carryover. City Council approved a carryover from prior year, so that's why we're increasing for that carryover here. And our projected budget, how we expect to end the fiscal year, is at 11.2 million. 2 million. Mainly that's for increased legal costs for code enforcement of 100,000. So we did adopt a balanced budget with the adjustment the carryover we provided for an dip into fund balance that was budgeted in prior year. So we're ending the year with a lower dip into fund balance from the carryover, and we still have a balanced budget. Here's a focus on the city's main revenues, which is property tax. It's the column in blue. And we have UUT in orange. And then all other general fund revenues are grouped together in this green. So if you look at property tax has been increasing from year to year, mainly our secure tax, but also the successor agency residual. So that's coming into the general fund is slightly increasing over time too. On UUT, we did see a decrease in fiscal year 2015-16. That was mainly due to the loss in UUT from the decrease from 8% to from 10% to 8%. And then in 16-17, we see it go back up to 2.5 million. So fiscal year 17-18, we're projecting to be about the same as prior year. On other revenues, we do see an increase and a drop again. A lot of this was one-time revenues from state mandated cost reimbursements that went back to prior years. And also we see increases on our revenues from collapsed funds. If you recall, we had development services, recreation, and paramedic programs that were in separate funds, and we collapsed them into the general fund starting 16-17. So overall, our revenues look at, they're slightly increasing over time. And here you got a graph that really gives you a visual over the years, with the blue being general fund revenues, or sources, which actually includes transfers in also. And in the red, you have the expenditures, which also includes transfers out. So you see we had a dip that actually our revenues or our expenditures exceeded our revenues in fiscal year 2012. Overall, over the years, we have managed to see our revenues exceed our expenditures, which is great news. And in fiscal year 16, again, expenditures exceeded our revenues. Mainly that was due to the decrease in the UUT. So fiscal year 17, we ended up the year good. We added to our reserves. So our revenues exceeded our expenditures, and that was presented actually fiscal year 16-17 CAFR at the last council meeting. So for fiscal year ending 2018, we are projecting pretty much that we're coming in within our revenue sources. So our expenditures are properly balanced, or that's the projection at this point in time. One of our enterprise funds or business type funds is the sewer fund. And here we show prior year actuals for 2 years, 15-16, 16-17, and our projected balances for 2017-18. If you look at charges for services, they have been increasing slightly, but our expenses have also been increasing. We are projecting them to decrease in fiscal year 17-18, but we have been dipping into our retained earnings or fund balance. In fiscal year 16-17, it was in the tune of $300,000. 16-17, we saw a dip of $500,000. And this fiscal year, we expect to end the year about dipping into fund balance of about $300,000. The main reason for this is because when the last rate study was conducted, fiscal year 2014, City Council did approve a rate increase, but not enough to balance the fund, because the fund had healthy reserves at that point in time. So the plan was to use those healthy reserves, which are now being depleted. So the next rate study that we're doing for water and sewer will be addressing this issue. And you see investment in capital assets. This is not considered an expenditure. This will be an investment in infrastructure or assets. That means it would not be an expense. It would be an addition to our balance sheet. We don't have such investments in the sewer fund. Most of the capital outlay is an expenditure. Our major enterprise fund would be water fund. And we show the same information for the water fund, fiscal year 15-16. And we do see the revenues also increasing, but we're projecting them to drop in fiscal year 17-18. The main reason for this decrease was that in fiscal year 15-16, the City Council approved excess water penalties. In 16-17, those penalties were increased. And fiscal year 17-18, we are looking at a decrease in those water penalties that was approved by the City Council back in the fall. So this is the main impact to the water revenues. We're seeing a drop in that, mainly due to the water penalties, excess water use penalties. On the expenditures, we do see an increase over time. A portion is in the capital outlay for fiscal year 16-17. You see an increase in the capital outlay. That was about $450,000 that was attributed to a joint project with LA County. So we could not capitalize that asset. It was a regional project. Therefore, it's an expenditure. It's a one-time expenditure here. Actually, it was a two-time. This was a second payment in fiscal year 16-17. So our net position change in fiscal year 16, we increased it by $180,000. So that amount went to fund balance. 16-17, we increased our fund balance up to $500,000. And 17-18, we're expecting to increase the fund balance by $4,700. The main change has been our investment in capital assets. If you notice here, 16, we increase our investment in infrastructure or pipelines in the tune of close to 400,000. 16-17, 279,000. In fiscal year 17-18, we're projecting to increase or invest in our infrastructure in the tune of 900,000. To give you a better view over time, starting also with fiscal year 2012, you see that in fiscal year 2012, our expenditures exceeded our revenues by a significant amount here. In 13, it balanced, so our expenditures and revenues pretty much in line. 2014, our revenues did exceed our expenditures. This is when the city started purchasing water. So in fiscal year 15, you can see the increase in expenditures. Also, fiscal year 14 was when the water rate study was first implemented. So we started seeing the rate increases. Fiscal year 16 also, our revenues slightly exceeded expenditures. 17, likewise. And in fiscal year 18, we're expecting to come in pretty close to a balanced budget that our revenues and our sources match our expenditures. So the main reason for why the rate increase didn't provide for an increase in revenues overall was also because due to water conservation. So our rates were going up, but our conservation means our revenues were flattening out pretty much. This concludes my presentation. We're asking for adoption of our Resolution 1819, which would adopt the mid-year budget for fiscal year 17-18 and appropriating the amounts projected as the new working budget. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Assistant Manager Medina. I'm sure we have tons of questions.
I have one. So when you're looking at our general fund for planning and community preservation, that increase in expenditures of 100,000, that was due to the legal bills for the coding, right?
Correct.
So that's where that landed. Okay. That's all the questions. I had one question. That was it.
We've had a lot of small increases across several revenue sources. Property tax, of course, that's a good thing. I mean, property values have been going up, and it's not surprising that we jumped up a little bit higher than what was predicted. But why the increase in the redevelopment agency residual? Why was that? And I know that's just to pay our expenses, isn't it?
No, the successor agency revenues are received in a different fund, and those are just to cover our debt service and administrative fees for since the dissolution of redevelopment agency. This is since the state took the redevelopment monies back, and they're paying off the debt service from various agencies. This is a residual, what has been left over. So now it comes to cities or agencies through property tax as this residual number. So that number has been fluctuating. Hopefully it continues going up because a lot of redevelopment agencies are paying off their debt. So there's going to be more money going back to the pot to be distributed as property taxes.
Given back. So
Yes.
to speak. Okay, well, that's good. Okay. I see, of course, utility taxes are decreasing, just a natural kind of a flow there.
That's part of it. When we look at the historical information and year-to-date, we realized that the projection was high compared to what we're actually receiving.
Yeah.
And also, a prior year numbers came in, 16, 17, and those numbers were lower. So we're expected to come in about the same as prior year. We just adjusted the budget for it.
Okay, so
to
it's
properly
not,
reflect that.
It's not further erosion of telecommunications.
There's a little bit of erosion, but we expect projecting that it's going to come in about the same as prior year.
Yeah, okay. Sales tax is up, I mean, $20,000, but I'm not going to, complain about that. But that's a good thing. Is that just because our businesses are doing well in Sierra Madre, or is there a particular thing that happened to increase
Yeah, the
that?
sales taxes fluctuates. So we look at the current information, what we're receiving, and base it on that. And it seems to be that any small business either picks up and has additional sales, or a business shuts down, then it has a major impact on our small revenue base for sales tax.
Okay, how about franchise fees? I'd expected that to be stable. I mean, why did that go up 20,000?
Franchise fees is based on their revenues and so forth. It's a particular percentage, so it does fluctuate from year to year too.
Yeah.
Usually it's in the ballpark. We don't see large fluctuations, but in some cases we will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Thank you.
I just have a question about the sewer fund and considering the significant change in net positions over the years, and how does that work with the timing of our water study? Or is there any concern, or do we need to move faster than we anticipated?
We need to move quickly. So it's already in the radar. The city staff is already working on it. So we need to move quickly because we noticed that depleting fund balance moving quite faster than we initially anticipated, because it's been a few years already, and that fund balance is going pretty low. So we do need to implement a new sewer rate study soon. Within the next year.
What is the approximate fund balance at this point?
I believe it's 300,000, but I will have to double check. I'll get back to you.
We anticipate to bring the sewer rate study forward with the water rate study. And we want to reiterate, at the time council made the decision, or whenever you see large deficits, you assume it's mismanagement. We had collected more money than necessary for capital improvements over time. Council made a good decision to let the fund balance go down as opposed to maintaining or increasing rates. Again, the idea was we'd collected too much, so let's not charge people more than what's necessary to balance the fund.
Any other questions? No. Okay, seeing none, we will open this up to public comment. If you could please state your name when you get to the podium, and you have 3 minutes. Mr. Alcorn?
The Alcorn of Grandview. I had looking at this, I was concerned about one of the things now that's happened in the past is that because of the way that they've handled the water system, we've been significantly underfunded for years. We have no money to pay for the situation that our pipes in right now. We're in bad shape because they've been improperly handled. And it's going to be, we see a line under depreciation on there. Supposedly that's supposed to mean something because there is depreciation. There should be an offsetting thing built up so you can cover the cost as the system deteriorates. Now, we just had and I don't know how much it is cost to do that. And hopefully that the study is how much is it going to cost to keep the thing up to par, because most of our infrastructure, or a lot of our infrastructure, it seems to me is not quite up to where it would be if it had been maintained properly throughout the years, okay? So there's a problem with maintaining our properties that the city has. The sewers, the water system, et cetera. And I won't go on along with that, but everybody's familiar that there's been inadequate funds to properly maintain our infrastructure, all of it. Well, anyway, it's a big part of it. Now, it gets me, I'm concerned then, okay, but we have some excess fund in the sewer fund now, so let's offset that. Now, is there an offsetting concern about how much it's going to take to keep the sewer system up? So we don't want to charge them too much, but the system has to pay for itself. It has to pay for itself on an ongoing basis. I can't ask the kid 10 years down, okay, well, I don't want to pay for it now, so you pay for it. And that looks like what's happened in the past, and I'd like to see that not happen again. So I'm concerned that we say, okay, we have some excess money. So what is the plan? There may be a plan, but it's not invisible to me. Maybe it's my ignorance. But is there a plan to show offsetting how much, where our system is right now, how much it's going to cost to do that, and what is the provision for getting the funds to make that happen? That's my concern and question. And when I see this thing there, okay, we have this line item, it's a depreciation, and we don't know. Now we have the sewer fund that we say $300 is a reserve fund. I doubt that that's adequate to keep an ongoing, if the problems come up with the sewer system. Maybe I'm just ignorant about it. But I seriously doubt that there's enough in there to adequately maintain our sewer system. I know there's certainly not now to obtain our water system. I guess I'm over my 3 minutes, but thank you. That's my concern. Thank you.
And I'll just do a quick address to that, and maybe staff wants to address it too. But luckily for you, Mr. Alcorn, I just went through 2 dry runs of our State of the City. So the information is kind of fresh. But the short of it is, yes, it is concerned with the sewer. That's why we're looking at the rate study and making sure that we are going to address it for the future. Master plan for the water has already been completed. There's been significant investments in the infrastructure, and you're right, we should have done this a lot sooner. So as we're investing more into infrastructure, addressing issues we should have done, we have deferred them for quite a while. Looking at the master water plan, and then also, or water infrastructure plan, and also the rate study, all 3 of those pieces will be coming into play. But we just can no longer ignore it, and we need to address it immediately. So there is a plan in place. State of the City will share a little bit of that, but I think in the next few months you're going to hear a lot more. Thanks. Staff, did you want to add anything to the answer to that?
I can add to that, Mayor. To the point on the water infrastructure, one of the most important parts of last year's budget, and then what our assistant city managers went over in the water fund, is our investment in capital assets in the water fund. This year is $915,000. That's more than what we spent in the previous 2 years combined. To say we took time off from our water infrastructure would be an understatement. It's in critical and poor condition, and the vast majority of it has passed its useful life. So we need to invest in it seriously, and not just have a one-time investment, but year over year. The sewer infrastructure is actually a different situation. The sewer infrastructure is in good shape. The amount of funds, again, that we had collected up to 2014 were in excess of what we needed to operate the fund, which is why we allowed annual depletions of the fund balance. We're at the last year where we can do that. So when we adopt the water rates and the sewer rates, the water rates will have will break out and show exactly what we're investing in infrastructure per household, whereas sewer, the infrastructure is pretty good, has been maintained fairly well, so it's more on an operational side.
Thank you, City Manager.
This last couple of years on the water side, we also did the refinancing, which is additional savings. We're also capitalizing this asset, so taking the expense as the years go by through depreciation instead of hitting the expenditure on the income statement. So that's why you see this balancing, and actually the revenues and expenditures, the expenditures maintaining within the revenues. So we're shooting for savings overall, and also through the water rate study, be better able to allocate that cost over time to be able to reinvest also in our infrastructure.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that the refinancing of that water bond was key to being able to invest at a higher level for this year, so thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for discussion. I'll just comment, given where we were a year and a half ago, and thinking how to balance the budget, where we were with the user utility tax at the time, I just want to really commend the staff at all the work that you've done to be able to balance the budget, to be able to find some savings even in times when we are increasing expenditures in certain areas. So going through that budget and this zero balance approach really did make a difference in being able to accommodate. I know this is pretty now and may not look so pretty next year, but given where we're at and what's been happening over the last year, I just want to commend the staff.
And to Mr. Alcorn's point, we are beginning, probably 10 years too late, 20 years too late, investing in our infrastructure, and that is really due to the staff for being able to find ways that we can pay for that going forward. So we commend you for putting together a really good budget for us.
I wanted to just comment on that I think with our new city manager and our new public works director, utility director, I think the management team gets it, the idea that when you invest in infrastructure, you save in operating costs. over the long run. And that's where we really need to turn it around. And so you don't get immediate payback, but 5 and 10 years down the line, it makes a huge difference to replace water lines and make sure that sewer lines are maintained properly. And I really feel that that's what we already accomplished here. And when the mayor says that these things are rolling out, we are going to hear more about it this spring. But we do have a water master plan already, and our water subcommittee's already been talking about how this might play out. Water rate study's about ready to come to council, and so a lot of good things I think are going to happen. But it's going to take patience on our part because it took a long time to get into this situation. As you pointed out, Mr. Alcorn, it took a long time, and I think we have the right thinking in city government right now on this, and I'm very optimistic about it in the long term.
Here. I echo everything that was said. I can't really say it better. Three members that spoke, so.
No comment.
Great. Do I have a motion to approve the mid-year budget?
So moved.
And I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. And given where all that good news is, we're going to move to the last item on our agenda. And I am going to ask, I think it's going to be Madam City Attorney Highsmith that's going to be presenting, and/or no, Mr. City Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. I will turn it over to the city attorney momentarily. I wanted to give a background on where this item came from. At the last council meeting, council had requested that we update our elections 9212 report, which is essentially a fiscal impact analysis of the measures on the ballot. We got to Measure D in the discussion of what a complete repeal of our 10% utility users tax would equal, and it is 24% of our general fund, or $2.6 million in revenue. As we discussed at the last meeting, there's also additional revenues that the departments bring in that we would no longer be able to count on. The areas we proposed bringing forward to staff would be to eliminate 6 police officers and 4 sergeants, eliminate our ambulance service, eliminate community services in its entirety, and reduce the library to 1 day per week operation. And all of that would equal about 1.7 million of the 2.6 million that we would need to reduce from the budget. The other 900,000 at the time looks like it would be a 20% reduction equally across all remaining departments, taking into account mandates, state laws that we can't, in fact, we have to fund them or comply with them, we can't cut them. During that conversation, council had asked the city attorney for information on disincorporation, and with that, I will turn it over to the city attorney.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a somewhat lengthy staff report that's full of a lot of legal statements and footnotes, and I'm going to try to simplify it. When a public entity doesn't have enough revenues to pay for essential services, there are only a few choices that you have. One is to raise revenue. Another one is to cut services. Another choice is to go through the Chapter 11 bankruptcy process, which a few cities have done. It doesn't eliminate the city, it just reorganizes it, and the result is less services. And then finally, disincorporation is another option. All of those, with probably the exception of reduction in services, are a pretty lengthy process. Disincorporation, unlike bankruptcy, it means the city would cease to exist as a separate legal entity. When you go through bankruptcy, the city's still there. It comes out the other end of the reorganization process, and you still have a city. Not so with disincorporation. The result of disincorporation would, in Sierra Madre, would be that Sierra Madre would cease to be Sierra Madre as a city, and you would be absorbed into unincorporated county territory. Your municipal code and all of your legislative enactments would be gone, and you would be under the county code. of ordinances. All building and zoning permits would be reviewed by the county, subject to the county code. Paramedic services, police services, fire services would be provided by the county. Your water services would, how your water services would be provided would be a county decision. The county might decide to continue the water department. It could also decide to sell the entire system, because as we're going to see, when you go through disincorporation, you don't eliminate the liabilities. The city keeps those liabilities even after it ceases to exist, and through the disincorporation process, all of your assets are taken into consideration and liquidated to the extent necessary to pay off and eliminate those debts and liabilities, so that the county gets the remaining assets and the territory free of the burden of that debt. The disincorporation has been with us for a long time. But it wasn't until the 1960s that local agency formation commissions called LAFCOs now take over the process and review that. But prior to that, there were disincorporation of 17 different cities in California, and you'd be surprised to know that one of those cities was Long Beach, and it reincorporated later. But since LAFCO took over the proceeding, we're going to talk about the proceeding a little bit, because it really takes about a year. And the punchline is that it does have to be approved by majority vote. But back to that, since LAFCO took over, there have only been 2 cities that I'm aware of that have actually disincorporated, and they didn't reincorporate. One was Cabazon, which is in Riverside County, and another one is Hornitos in Mariposa, and they both disincorporated in the early 1970s. But since then, I'm not aware that we've seen any other city disincorporate. But every now and then you hear the threat of that happening. The disincorporation process through LAFCO starts first with either a petition by the registered voters in the city, and it needs to be 25% of the current registered voters sign a petition and bring it forward, or the city council adopts a resolution of intent. And before you can even circulate a resolution of intent to apply to LAFCO to disincorporate, first you've got to create a plan of how you're going to do this. The plan for services is it has to explain how all the services will be transferred to the county, how that's going to be financed, a description of all of your financial obligations, any bonds, assessments that you have, and anything else that LAFCO would need to know about. So you create this plan of services first, which takes a while, and then the city would provide notice to all the residents and any agency that provides services for 21 days prior to the hearing before LAFCO. So then finally, the whole package of the plan for services, you've satisfied all the notice, goes to LAFCO. And then LAFCO gets to decide whether the application is deemed complete. If they don't think it is, they'll ask for more information. But finally, a hearing is set before LAFCO. It's supposed to happen within 90 days of when they've deemed your application to be complete. Now, LAFCO has to provide notice of this hearing to every registered voter in Sierra Madre, all the landowners, and also each city within 3 miles of the boundaries of Sierra Madre. So it's a lot of notice. The LAFCO hearing, it might take more than one meeting. They can continue it for up to 70 days, but under the law, you're not supposed to spend any longer than that. And then LAFCO receives all the testimony, all the evidence at the hearing. And at that hearing, it will also receive any written protests. Now, if it gets 50% of all registered voters send in, this has never happened at any LAFCO proceeding. But if 50% of all registered voters were to file written protests for the LAFCO hearing, the whole thing would stop. The procedure would terminate. Now, assuming that that doesn't happen, and it never has happened, that's a very high bar. 35 days after the hearing, LAFCO then adopts a resolution, either approving or conditionally approving or denying the disincorporation. And in terms of conditionally approving, what that really means is you need more money, and we've looked at your plan for services, and even if you sell everything, it won't be enough to pay off your liabilities. So it looks like the county will need to levy taxes, and that's a parcel tax on all the landloaders in the city as a condition of approving the disincorporation. And LAFCO has to make some findings to disincorporate. And the kinds of findings they're trying to make is that you've created, by disincorporating, there's some kind of sustainable system for continuing some form of services. And that's the whole point of disincorporation, is that without it, there was no sustainable method to continue services. So LAFCO adopts this resolution and then mails it to all the agencies whose boundaries would actually change due to the disincorporation, and provides 30 days. Also in the mailing explains that there's 30 days to try to get them to change their mind. In other words, make a motion for reconsideration. But in order to do that, you have to present new information that they didn't have in front of them before. Now, finally, the disincorporation goes to the voters, and that's going to either be at a special election or a general election. And now, and this I think is interesting, if the disincorporation is a conditional one and requires a parcel tax to help pay for it, it's still only a majority vote. This is the only time a parcel tax could be levied without a 2/3 vote. But through a disincorporation procedure, it's only a majority vote. Majority vote to approve the disincorporation and approve the levy of taxes. Now, if it's approved by the voters, then the LAFCO executive director issues a certificate of completion for the whole process and has to select an effective date. And by law, that effective date is supposed to be within 9 months of the date that they've certified. So as you can see, the whole process takes at least a year. Now, if it's not approved by the voters, then the whole thing stops again, and now no one can request a new disincorporation procedure for 2 years unless LAFCO waives that, because in the interest of public interest, that it wouldn't make sense to wait the whole 2 years. And that's a flyover of the process of disincorporation. I think the important takeaways are that it does require a majority vote, and the whole point of disincorporation is how can you create a situation so that there's some sustainable level of services? And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
That was quite a bit of information. Councilmember Capoche, you have a question?
Yeah, it really looks like there's just no way out of the mess we would be in if we lost that revenue. As his city manager and finance director pointed out in the last meeting of going through the steps to balance a budget, I mean, we decimate our services to the level where we're really not functioning very well as a city anyway, and you still have a shortfall that you need to to make up for. And from what I can see too, is bankruptcy is not going to help, because we would really, it still falls back on the city to deal with the PERS obligation. So if we were to try to get out of PERS, because that's a big driver of our cost. I mean, it's $60+ million to get rid of, take everybody off of PERS. And that's, not even a practical thing, because how are you going to hire police and fire personnel that are not part of PERS? And just this little island of Sierra Madre where we have a different benefit package than everybody else has. So I would think we'd have to pay a pretty high salary for public safety personnel to come over here to work under those conditions. And then, as somebody had mentioned before, we start to pay into Social Security, create a 401 type K, but it's got to be something that's competitive to entice them to come over. Right now, we don't pay our public safety personnel as much as our surrounding communities, and everybody knows that. And but we're getting by this way. So if we were to try to get out of PERS, we'd have to come up with plus $60 million to do that. There just doesn't seem to be any way out of it, period. I mean, how could we do that? How could we get out of it?
The problem with getting out of any kind of retirement system that you're in, so we'll use PERS as the example, is that you're required to superfund PERS. At the point that you're leaving PERS, you have to come up with the amount, and they'll tell you what that amount is, that literally would fund today as if everyone that ever worked for you retired immediately. Yeah. And you had to come up with 100% of that cost. That's what PERS demands to terminate the pool. Now, of course, as you're in the pool, those kinds of demands are not made at all. But that's the cost, which is why of the cities that have recently gone bankrupt, and I believe there was 4, but I'm having trouble thinking of what the 4th one was. There's Stockton, San Bernardino, and Vallejo, and I know there was one other.
Lakes. Was it Mammoth
Okay,
Lakes?
but that wasn't the one I was thinking of, so maybe there's 5. But each of the cities that have recently bankrupted, not a single one of them has attempted to discharge its PERS obligation through bankruptcy for this very reason. The price tag is huge. And the other reason they have not done so is assuming that you can even do that, the likelihood that you would be able to attract personnel and that's where you get your services, are the personnel that you hire to provide them. The likelihood that you can attract personnel to come to your city and take a job is very slim, and that's, at least that's their the perspective. And
so we would fight through trying to get to that point if we opted to go to bankruptcy, because I mean, even if we don't, let's just say, okay, we're going to try to make this work. It's just back to what you said, just constant cutting of services to the point where we're really not even providing adequate police or fire services. We have no recreational, a library that is completely non-functional. We stop repairing sidewalks and streets, and I mean, to the extent that we get federal money or state money to do that, we could do that. But I mean, we're just not functioning, and we're still bleeding down our reserves.
That's the problem, is even if a city was to go down the bankruptcy path or even disincorporation, either of those procedures take a while, more than a year.
Right.
And by then, you've already necessarily laid off people and done everything you possibly could to try to balance what you've got, which means you have drastically eliminated services to your community, and you haven't even gone through the bankruptcy process or the disincorporation process yet.
So if you went through the bankruptcy process, what I'm trying to say is you would need a plan to see your way through this. Otherwise, you are just slowly killing yourself. Or so, I mean, you couldn't go through bankruptcy and decide, okay, well, this isn't working, I think we need to disincorporate, or maybe you could, but even the disincorporation process requires a lot of time, and from what I'm reading in the report, and you mentioned, our city would also have to come up with a plan to discharge our obligations. So if we presented to LAFCO that, okay, this is the direction we want to go, here's how we're going to fund it. We don't have enough funding. So LAFCO would say, all right, well, you need to put it on the ballot, and the voters then would need to approve it, like you say, conditionally. So disincorporation would come on the ballot with a property tax.
With a parcel tax, correct.
Yeah, parcel tax that requires 50% vote. It's like the joke's on you people. You voted to put yourself in this, and now we can tax you with only 50% instead of a 2/3.
That's correct.
And that's just to get you
That's to get
dissolved, to get you dissolved.
Yeah.
Right.
Paying more to dissolve.
And to add to that point, the reason we skipped over bankruptcy is, again, bankruptcy is to discharge debt and reorganize. Even if we were to discharge 100% of our pension debt, with the loss of the UT revenue, we would not be bringing in enough to operate without also every cut that we've listed would then balance it out. So we're not having a debt or restructuring problem. We're having an operating problem moving forward after the cuts have been put in place.
Right, so then bankruptcy is still just not even appropriate under those circumstances.
Correct.
So it just looks like we just would automatically go to a disincorporation scheme that will cost our voters more money in the near term, possibly lose our water system because that could be sold off to generate capital to pay off the PERS obligations, and then you'll have higher water rates also with your increased property taxes, you know? So it's really just a frightening and almost an absurd, comical exercise that we're going through, because, I mean, my feeling is, you know, if our citizens were just aware of really what the alternatives here, it's just so outrageously ridiculous that it's just frustrating to have to deal with it again. So, but anyway, that's a statement more than a question. But
I think I have a question in terms of, I mean, that's all the technical piece, that's the process, but pragmatically, when would the UUT actually end? And what happens to the city? If we are going through this disincorporation process, you have to go through the planning, you have to go through it. If we're cutting 6 police officers, if we're cutting paramedics, we're going library 1 day a week, we have no community services, how do we even, really, how do we survive? How do we function as a city that is going to go through the process of disincorporation? What's the skeleton of what this city could look like? What services are we even providing?
So on the service side, I think there would be, again, assuming residents vote for the UT repeal, there would be a period where council would have to start drawing on fund balance pretty immediately. And then if the plan is to move forward with disincorporation, we would likely at that point start making cuts immediately because it is a long process, and we'd have to remain a viable organization even though we wouldn't have ambulance, very much police presence. We'd still have to remain viable on a balance sheet anyway to get to the end of the process. Council, of course, could select other alternatives where we said if the repeal passes, then we'll give the cuts a shot first before we go through disincorporation. So it could be fairly immediate, but I would imagine, and it's just speculation, that council would want time to make an informed decision. We'd likely draw down on our fund balance pretty immediately, which while reducing services and increasing our liabilities. So there's not an outcome where anyone really comes out better, even if you wait to make the cuts. It's just there's an end point. It's just how quickly you get there.
Because this is a voter initiative, if Measure D is approved, the UUT is cut immediately.
Right.
It's not like it's not like you wait until the beginning of 2019. It's effective immediately.
so before it could be implemented, before you can contact, you know, AT&T and Verizon and Edison to do it, we'd have to give refunds?
We might. We don't automatically give refunds. The refunds are given through a claim process. But I did want to answer the mayor's question about how quickly would this happen. And then what the city manager was describing is literally your plan B under the fiscal impact report, the elections code 90-12 analysis of the fiscal impacts, and then the plan B, which is, well, what do you do with less money? What does the city look like? What does a skeleton version of city services start to look like?
So if the repeal goes through, which I'm really optimistic that it won't, that we have some of our residents, the majority of our residents know better. But if it goes through, then we don't have the UUT. So let's say we don't want to do the disincorporation. We can do one of the other options, which is increased revenues. It would take us 2 years to put something on the ballot like a parcel tax, right? Because we couldn't do a UUT, we'd have to do a parcel tax. And it would take about 2 years, in which case we've already had to lay off everybody because we don't have the funds to keep them until we can get a parcel tax.
Yeah, that's a good point. You'd have to wait a year to even be able to bring a new UUT back. You can't do it immediately. Once it's been repealed, a whole year has to go by. And then as far as a parcel tax, you could put one on a special election if that was. No, I'm gonna. A parcel tax for general purposes needs to be put on a general election.
Yeah.
So no matter what, it would be a full year to be able to raise new revenue if you lose the UUT due to the passage of Measure D. So you won't have the revenue. And really then the only thing you can do in the meantime while you're waiting out that year, you have to decrease services. Services will have to be cut.
Or you could spend down reserves. Because
You could do that.
We did that last time when it went
You could
from
do that.
10% to 8%. We ran a deficit.
But that will only last for so long.
Right.
And you still need some in there for,
Yeah.
you know, a major disaster. Okay, well, this was depressing.
Before I open this up for public comment, I just want to make sure we have any other questions that are lingering that we have not asked the city attorney or the city manager. Okay, we will open this up for public comment. If you'd like to comment on this, please state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Edward Garcia, East Grandview. Madam Mayor and City Council, thank you for your service to this community. I am the current chair of the No on Measure D committee. I'm here to remind our community and the council that 2 years ago, 72% of us went to the polling place and we said we want to fund this city. We want to support the city. We want to bring things back to the way they were. The last 2 years have been very nice. We've been able to go to a paid fire department. We've hired a new city manager. We've hired a new public works director. We have restaffed our police department. We have done all these things. And I just want to encourage everybody here that's listening at home, because there aren't too many people here in the gallery, to go out on April 10th and vote no on Measure D. We went from hearing our city staff talk about a balanced budget. The very next item on the agenda is talking about disincorporation. How does that happen? Well, how do we avoid it? We vote no on Measure D. We vote no on Measure D. I can go on for more than 3 minutes about this issue. I just want to remind the electorate, when they're seeing the proponents of what they're putting out, a lot of the stuff that's been being put out is put out by someone that doesn't even live in this city, or an organization that doesn't even live in this city, and it's disingenuous. They're talking about what we're paying our city employees. You can't look at those things in a vacuum. You have to look at them on a relative basis. On a relative basis, looking back at 2016 numbers, the numbers that they are using, we're paying our city managers 26% less than Arcadia, 21% less than Monrovia, 8% less than South Pasadena, 20% less than La Cañada. And I can go through every department head position and show you that we pay less than our neighbors. And thanks to you, city council members are able to get great talent at cheap prices. So I thank you for that, and I commend you for that. But again, we will be have a booth at the Wisteria Festival. We can give you information talking about the fiscal issues and what it means. But again, 72% of us went out, and hopefully last two years ago, and hopefully that we can come back to the polls and not forget about why we love this community and that we want to in fact fund this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on this issue? Okay, seeing none, I will bring this back to council, and I believe this is a receive and file. Yes, it is. Given that, that is our last item on the agenda. Do we have any new items that we would like to bring forward for future agendas?
I'll just comment really quickly on Mr. Garcia. I mean, I think that one, thank him and the rest of the committee, the NO and UUT committee, for all their service. And I don't think we could have said it any better than what he just said. So thank you for the city attorney for that report as well.
I'd like to thank Mr. Garcia as well. He's a very busy man, and he has decided to devote himself for the next few weeks to this project. And I know there are others in the community that will be joining him, and I just want to encourage them all. And I think he articulated the situation as well as any of us up here on the council could. So kudos to him and all the volunteers.
Anyone else like to comment? Okay, thank you. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you.